In the 5th year of my marriage to Grant Carter, his affair with a girl he was keeping at a hotel was exposed, becoming common knowledge. To prevent her from being labeled a homewrecker, Grant came to me with a divorce agreement, saying, "Miss Jensen helped me back then. Before he passed away, he asked me to take care of Willow Jensen. Now that this has come out, I can't just ignore it." Over the years, Willow had always been Grant's top priority. In my past life, upon hearing these words, I broke down and made a huge scene, refusing to divorce. It wasn't until I developed severe depression that Grant, based on Willow's comment that "my sister doesn't look sick at all," decided I was faking it, trying to manipulate him, and framed me for cheating, directly filing for divorce. Only then did I realize that I could never compare to an act of gratitude. In despair, I committed suicide. Opening my eyes again, I signed that divorce agreement without hesitation. 1. Scarlett, how about we remarry after this blows over? In the villa's courtyard, while I was spacing out on a stone bench, Grant, along with Willow, came before me. Just 3 hours earlier, the paparazzi had exposed Willow as Grant's mistress, and the entire internet was digging into her past, calling her a third wheel who had interfered in Grant and my blissful love affair. Grant's loving husband persona crumbled, and the stock price of Carter Corporation began to fluctuate. In my past life, when Grant came to me with the divorce agreement, I angrily uprooted all the roses he had grown for me in the yard, hysterically questioning him about his relationship with Willow. She was clearly just his mentor's daughter, and there were a million ways to resolve this. But he chose to sacrifice me, just to keep Willow from getting more depressed. Little did Grant know, during the period when the scandal was trending, I was also diagnosed with moderate depression. "Scarlett." Grant called me again, pulling me back from my reverie. I lowered my eyes, focusing on the divorce agreement on the stone table. He knelt on one knee beside me, his deep eyes looking up at me, his warm palm enveloping my hand. His tone was coaxing. "Scarlett, just do it for me, okay? We'll announce to the public that our marriage has been dead in name for a long time and that we had planned to divorce a year ago but just couldn't find the right time." I didn't speak for a long time. Behind him, Willow was wearing a white dress, draped with Grant's coat, her lips pale, and her eyes red. "Sister Scarlett, please help me, okay? My mother committed suicide because of cyberbullying-induced depression. I don't want to follow my mother's path, sister. I'll kneel to you, please help me." As she was about to kneel, Grant quickly rose to his feet, supporting her and protectively pulling her into his arms. His face was grim, and he scolded her in a low voice, "What are you doing?" Willow choked up, her voice delicate and tearful. She then lowered her tear-filled eyes. I just wanted my sister to feel better." Grant's brows immediately furrowed with impatience. He looked at me, his previous tenderness completely gone. "Scarlett, I didn't come here to discuss this with you. I've already made a decision. If you don't want a divorce, then don't blame me." I faintly raised my eyes to meet his gaze, and his following words stopped abruptly. But I knew what he was going to say. He was going to say, "Scarlett, you know my methods. I have a million ways to make you sign obediently. Even if we go to court, you can't win against Carter Corporation's lawyers." Those were his exact words in my previous life. Later, I was framed and sent to the beds of several male models, and the evidence of my cheating was irrefutable. Overnight, I became a scandalous woman, enduring public condemnation. And he and Willow became innocent victims. "I can sign, but you have to promise me one thing," I said after a long silence. 2. Grant raised his eyes and glanced at me, then nodded in agreement. He handed me the pen. I took it and signed my name on the divorce agreement without any emotion. "Aren't you going to look at the agreement?" Grant asked, frowning. I smiled, no need. He was practically leaving with nothing, giving all the assets to me, just for Willow, just to repay an act of gratitude. "Go to the Civil Affairs Bureau tomorrow to handle the paperwork." "Okay," I said. Grant's hand holding the divorce agreement paused slightly. He looked at me with a hint of bewilderment in his eyes, but ultimately said nothing. As they left, Willow turned back and gave me a mocking look, her thin lips silently mouthing, "You lost." I really did lose. I lost a lifetime, so now I don't want to lose anymore. After a while, my phone screen lit up. It was a message from Grant. "I'm sorry for what happened today, Scarlett. I'm sorry. After this blows over, I'll give you a grand wedding again. We'll remarry. I can't just stand by and watch Willow's depression get worse. You can understand me, right?" Looking at this sentence, I couldn't help but laugh, tears in my eyes. It was the same in my previous life. To force me to divorce, Grant asked his friends for advice and got drunk. But he forgot that his friends were also my friends. Ethan was trying to persuade Grant not to risk his marriage for Willow. At the same time, he was mediating with me, asking me to try to understand Grant, saying that Grant was a man of loyalty. Back then, if Willow's father hadn't seen Grant's ability, invested in him, and helped him start his business, Grant wouldn't be where he was today. Back then, I cried and retorted. Grant has a million ways to clarify this matter. Why does he have to divorce? Ethan was silent. He had asked Grant, and Grant had replied. I have to let someone down. I can only wrong Scarlett. She loves me and can understand me. Because I loved him, I was the one to be sacrificed. What kind of logic was that? Fortunately, I still had a chance. 3. Whenever it came to Willow, Grant always handled things particularly quickly. He signed the divorce agreement with me during the day and arranged a press conference that night, asking his assistant to invite me to attend for clarification. Before I could speak, the assistant, thinking I was going to refuse, told me what Grant had told him to say. He said, Miss Scarlett, you should attend this press conference, even if it's not for Mr. Carter, it's for your reputation. I was stunned for a second, then chuckled. Grant was threatening me. He was again trying to use the same tactics he used in my previous life to force me to compromise, smearing me and leaving me to struggle under public opinion. In the end, I could only bow my head and give in. I never understood whether Grant treated me as a wife or an enemy. Now he wanted to publicly clarify his relationship with me. I was no exception. The press conference was arranged in the lobby of the most luxurious hotel in Kingsport, and the most influential reporters in the industry were invited to attend. When Willow appeared arm in arm with Grant and a Cheongsam, the reporters swarmed over instantly. Grant subconsciously protected Willow behind him, smiling as he blocked the microphones. I'll answer everyone's questions one by one later. Now, please make way, okay? His voice was gentle. When he looked up, he happened to see me, who was also surrounded by reporters. When our eyes met, I even faintly expected Grant to help me out. But the next second, he casually looked away, a smile on his lips, and led Willow to the stage, as if he hadn't seen me. I hooked the corners of my mouth in mockery. The reporter closest to me was probably an intern. Timidly, she handed me the microphone and asked, Miss Scarlett, did you really divorce Mr. Carter? Yes, I said with a smile, nodding. The intern pushed up her glasses, but you and Mr. Carter have known each other since high school, dated for 7 years, and been married for 5 years. Mr. Carter even spent a fortune to buy an island named after you last month. I was still smiling, but the smile didn't reach my eyes. That's what he owed me. To take care of the sick Willow, he missed my birthday and gave me a compensatory gift. In my previous life, I was complacent about this, but later I learned that the idea was Ethan's. The island was chosen by Grant's assistant, and he didn't even know where the island was. Then do you still love Mr. Carter now? She looked at me nervously, and the reporters surrounding me also fell silent, including Grant on the stage. His brows furrowed slightly. And I just glanced at him calmly, then said with a smile, no, I don't love him anymore. 4. I didn't stay until the end of the interview. After Grant clarified that his marriage with me had been dead in name for a year, I left. Overnight, I became Grant's unwanted second-hand goods. And Willow became the only innocent victim in this controversy. The interview that day was pinned to the top of social media for several days, and the topic's popularity never waned. Especially Grant's words, Scarlett and I had planned to divorce a year ago, but the time wasn't right. We originally wanted to handle it quietly, but now it's affecting innocent people, so we have to publicly clarify. Miss Willow Jensen is not a third party in our broken relationship. She is my teacher's only concern in this world. It's only natural that I take care of her. I hope everyone will see this rationally. Some fans were manipulated, saying that the reason for the breakdown of my relationship with Grant was that I couldn't tolerate any interference and that I saw their pure brother-sister friendship and so-called gratitude as dirty. Others said that I was petty and not generous enough, and that I hadn't learned half of Grant's loyalty and righteousness in 5 years of marriage. The topic fermented for several days. I became the target of public criticism. After receiving my divorce certificate and leaving the Civil Affairs Bureau, Grant stopped me. Don't take what people are saying online to heart. It won't be long before everyone forgets about it. I stopped, unable to help but chuckle. How come there was such a big difference in how we were being treated, even though we were both being verbally abused on social media? Scarlett, it's almost the new year in 2 months. How about we remarry at the beginning of next year? He looked at me and was about to approach me when I took a step back, casually shifting my gaze to the reporters being blocked by bodyguards not far away. Grant seemed to realize the impropriety and stopped in place. Grant, I'm going back to Port City. It's true that you haven't been back for a long time. It's good to go back for a trip. I'll pick you up after the new year and bring you back. I'm not coming back. I calmly interrupted Grant. His faint smile froze on his face, and his eyes showed a hint of bewilderment. I said again, you promised me one thing when I agreed to sign the divorce agreement. It's time to fulfill it now. Grant stared blankly at me. When I was first reborn, it took me only a few seconds to digest my love and hate for Grant. At the moment I saw the divorce agreement, I thought about tearing it up in a fit of madness and making a scene with him again, but in the end, reason prevailed. After a long while, I smiled. Grant, I hope you never appear in front of me again. 5. When Scarlett smiled and disappeared into the crowd, Grant was slow to react. For a moment, he felt a strange panic, as if he was about to lose the most important thing. Just like how he had felt uneasy when Scarlett had calmly signed the divorce agreement that day. She didn't argue or make a fuss, as if she had foreseen all the outcomes. But just recently, Scarlett was still making a huge fuss about him forgetting her birthday, and he had even been slapped by Scarlett. He thought that he was proposing a fake divorce. Scarlett would go crazy and fight with him. He had even prepared for it. But she didn't. She picked up the pen, her expression as calm as a stagnant pool. At that moment, he had wanted to stop Scarlett, but in the end, he did nothing. He thought, it's okay, Scarlett loves him, they were just faking a divorce, and he would make it up to her in the future. But Willow was different. She couldn't be hurt in any way because of him. Back then, if Willow's father hadn't seen his talent and risked being kicked out of the shareholders' meeting by the other shareholders to invest in his project and help him grow, becoming a rising star in Kingsport, he wouldn't have his current achievements. Nor would he be worthy of Willow. Before Willow's father passed away, he hoped that he would protect Willow and ensure her well-being. He didn't want to be a perfidious villain. Ethan had asked him, if one day, Willow and Scarlett both fell into a cliff, who would you save? At that time, he laughed, thinking that this question was too subpar. He would save Willow, but he would die with Scarlett. Ethan laughed with him, but he asked himself, what if Scarlett doesn't want to die? Grant, you can't always wrong Scarlett just because she likes you. If she doesn't feel your love, she will despair too. That day, he didn't take it seriously. He never even took that sentence to heart. Unexpectedly, it would eventually come true. 6. At night, Grant still returned to the villa. Since marrying him, Scarlett had always lived in the villa on the mountainside. She was an exceptional painter. At the age of 10, she was hailed as a child prodigy for her landscape paintings that transcended the mundane. Everyone believed that her mastery of traditional Chinese painting was extraordinary and that she would become a leader in the industry, which indeed happened later. However, after the marriage, Scarlett's painting style changed, no longer like before. Scarlett's teacher had tried to enlighten her with good intentions, but the effect was not significant. Later, Scarlett gave up painting, even resisting picking up a brush. Grant entered Scarlett's studio. When he saw the landscape painting on the easel, he couldn't help but be stunned. With just a few strokes, it was incredibly lifelike. When the housekeeper, Chen, saw the light in the studio, she came over and was slightly surprised to see Grant, Mr. Carter. Grant looked up, when did Madam paint this? Chen replied, the day you accompanied Miss Jensen back. Grant nodded, his lips curving into a smile, but he couldn't manage to laugh. After leaving the studio, he returned to the room he shared with Scarlett. He had told himself countless times that he and Scarlett were only going through a fake divorce. As soon as the storm passed, he would propose to Scarlett again and make it up to her with a grand wedding. But somehow, his heart always felt empty. He took all of Scarlett's words today as nonsense spoken in anger. Kingsport was home to both Scarlett and him. How could she not come back? Knock, knock, the door to the master bedroom was suddenly knocked on. Grant, sitting at the foot of the bed, looked up. It was Willow. She was wearing thin clothes, her face slightly flushed, standing at the door, quietly looking at Grant. What are you doing here? Willow pursed her lips. I'm scared being alone in the hotel, so I came to find you. Is it that I'm? As she spoke, she lowered her eyes. Am I disturbing you? Grant's brows furrowed slightly, but he still said, it's okay, it's a bit late today. I'll have Chen prepare a guest room for you. Stay there for now. As he was about to call Chen, Willow stepped forward, walked into the room, and looked at Grant with her affectionate eyes. Grant, I don't want to stay in the guest room. Can I? She asked softly. Grant's brows furrowed even deeper, his thin lips parted to refuse, but when he met her slightly red eyes, he still softened. 7. When the plane landed in Port City, it was Owen Zhang who came to pick me up. When he was 18 years old, he had rescued a girl but was falsely accused of rape and sentenced to 3 years. Because of his criminal record, no company was willing to take him in. I met him at an art exhibition. He never interacted with people and always kept his eyes lowered. When others approached him, he would only retreat timidly. Later, one night, I was on my way home when I encountered thugs and was almost assaulted. He happened to pass by. I thought he would turn a blind eye. But he didn't hesitate for even a moment. That day, I asked him, what if I also falsely accuse you? He smiled bitterly, then I'll accept it. I used my family's influence to clear his name, and the truth was revealed that day. He stood in the distance, looking at me red-eyed through the crowd, bowing and thanking me. 3 years in prison had not erased his kindness. My father also extended an olive branch to him because he had saved me, arranging for him to join the group. Starting from the bottom, he was now my father's most capable assistant. Miss Scarlett, long time no see. Owen was wearing a trench coat and took my suitcase. I nodded, my nose inexplicably stinging. 5 years ago, after I married Grant, I accompanied him north. In my previous life, when I had an accident, he had been arranged by my father to go to Country A for closed training. Until my death, I never saw Owen again. Miss Scarlett, after you come back this time, will you leave again? He asked. I said, I won't leave. Owen laughed. Mr. Chu is very happy to know that Miss Scarlett has returned. Suddenly, I was stunned, and the hand in my pocket couldn't help but tighten, a touch of bitterness rising in my heart. At that time, the news of my divorce from Grant was known to everyone. My father, fearing that I would be wronged, flew from Port City to Kingsport overnight. He painstakingly persuaded me. Grant is always unclear about what he's doing. Back then, he would rather cooperate with the old man from the Jensen family than accept your help. To put it nicely, he didn't want to rely on you. To put it bluntly, isn't relying on the Jensen family's investment still relying on someone? Scarlett, it's over if it's over. Grant isn't suitable for you. He wanted to take me back to Port City. But I didn't want to. I cried and made a fuss about staying. I said through tears, I love Grant, I don't want a divorce. Why should I be sacrificed to fulfill his gratitude? Even if he forces me to death, I will never leave, I won't go. In the end, my father had a heart attack from anger and was admitted to the ICU, and several critical condition notices were issued. Overnight, my mother's hair turned white. Later, when my father woke up, he didn't say anything, but I knew he was disappointed in me. My mother was still advising me as she left, your father has never interfered with any of your decisions over the years. But Grant is not a good man. At that time, I couldn't listen to anything and was determined to run into a brick wall. In the end, it was only when I risked my life that I understood. I wasn't that important to Grant. How are they? I asked Owen. Owen nodded. The group is developing very well, and Mr. and Mrs. Chu are both very healthy. I smiled and met his clear eyes. Thank you, Owen. Thank you for taking care of them in my place. Owen shook his head. He said that it was what he should do. If it weren't for me and my father helping him back then, he might have died in some forgotten corner. 8. Hot topics on social media were still emerging one after another. From Willow being Grant's mistress, it had now evolved into me being a heartless and ungrateful person. Yesterday, the paparazzi had photographed me and Owen at the airport, and now they were saying that I had cheated long ago, which was why my relationship with Grant had broken down. I couldn't help but laugh. When I lowered my eyes, the phone screen showed a photo that Willow had sent to me through an alternate account. It was a photo of her spending the night at the villa on the mountainside. Grant took the initiative to let me stay overnight last night. What do you think Grant will do tonight? Grant is a very responsible person, and now the shackles are gone. Scarlett, your husband is mine now. She was trying to provoke me, but my heart was already without waves. Owen poured me a cup of tea, glanced worriedly at my phone screen, and said in a deep voice, Miss Scarlett, I will get back all the grievances you have suffered. I didn't answer him, but instead asked, I heard that my father has introduced you to many socialite ladies, intending for you to get married. Why did you refuse? Owen seemed not to expect that I would ask this. He lowered his eyes, his fingertips caressing the rim of the teacup. After a long silence, I asked again, is it because of me? He suddenly looked up, but when he met my eyes, he covered up his guilty conscience and avoided them. In the 5 years, although Owen and I had never met, every time it was my birthday, there was a generous gift he had sent. Spending thousands of dollars. And he would transfer money to my account from time to time. He gave me almost everything he earned. I refused many times, but he was still persistent. Later, I called him and lost my temper at him for the first time. I said, Owen, you saved me once, and I helped you once. It's even now. It was my father who let you into the group. You got where you are today because of yourself. You don't owe me anything. I'm not your creditor. What you're doing will only ruin my marriage and make Grant misunderstand my relationship with you. After that, Owen stopped transferring money to me. Giving gifts was also just a formality. Owen, I said you don't owe me anything. As soon as I finished speaking, Owen pursed his lips and said, no. What? He looked at me, slightly curling his lips, a faint smile on his face, his eyes filled with love. I like Miss Scarlett. I know that I and Miss Scarlett are worlds apart. I have never hoped that Miss Scarlett could turn around and look at me, but my heart belongs to Miss Scarlett. I don't want to deceive myself, nor do I want to delay others. As Owen's voice fell, I raised my eyes and quietly looked at him. He was the same age as me, but he was much more mature. The first time I saw him, he was timid and out of place. Now, he had become the backbone of the group, the person my father valued the most. Last night, when I returned to the old house, my father chatted with me for a long time, talking about the future of the group, my future. Finally, he asked me 2 more questions. The first was, "Do you still like Grant?" I shook my head, giving a negative answer. But I was silent about the second question. He asked me, "Are you willing to marry Owen?" My father was already planning to retire. Although Owen had followed my father for many years, he was not a member of the Chu family after all. I had been a bit confused before, but now I had the answer. "Owen, are you willing to marry me?" 9. 2 days later in Kingsport. Grant sat in the studio, looking down at the interview Scarlett had given to that intern that day. The intern asked her curiously, "Then do you still love Mr. Carter now?" Scarlett smiled and replied, "I don't love him anymore." The simple 3 words inexplicably made him feel oppressed. He replayed this clip countless times, trying to find something in Scarlett's eyes. In the end, it was fruitless. Frustrated, he pulled up the chat box with Scarlett. But when he opened it, he realized that the last message was when he reminded her to get the divorce certificate at the Civil Affairs Bureau at 9 o'clock, and she had replied with a, "Okay." Then there was nothing else. In the past, Scarlett liked to cling to him, sharing everything with him, no matter how big or small, and he would respond to her in a timely manner when he saw it. He flipped through the records. Later, most of the time, Scarlett was talking to herself. Occasionally, he would just take the time to reply with "Okay" or "I see." The group's work was very busy. Willow had depression after the death of Mr. Jensen and attempted suicide again and again. He simply couldn't manage everything. Suddenly, Ethan sent a message. "Scarlett is going to marry Owen." Grant stood up abruptly, accidentally knocking over the easel next to him. The landscape painting fell to the ground. When he rushed to pick it up, a medical report was pressed under the drawing board. He was stunned for 2 seconds. When he finished reading all the contents, his fingertips trembled slightly. The patient's mood fluctuates severely, and suicidal thoughts occur repeatedly. There are severe sleep disorders. It is determined that the patient has a tendency towards moderate depression. The date at the end was the day he proposed a fake divorce to Scarlett. "Grant, what happened?" Willow heard the noise and hurriedly ran from the master bedroom to the studio. When she saw the diagnostic medical record in Grant's hand, a calculation flashed in her eyes. "Can I take a look at this medical record?" Willow asked softly. Grant didn't say anything, but just felt a burst of dull pain in his heart. She took the medical record, turned a few pages, pretended to breathe a sigh of relief, patted Grant on the shoulder, and comforted him. "Grant, don't worry. Have you forgotten? I am also a patient with depression. You have seen what it's like when I have an attack. I saw Scarlett that day. She was so healthy and didn't look sick at all. Scarlett may be too angry, so she took a fake medical record to deceive you." Willow looked at Grant. Just as she was about to continue speaking, Grant suppressed the emotions in his heart and took the medical record from her hand. Just as he took 2 steps, he thought of something and turned back to her. "Don't stay in the master bedroom after tomorrow. Scarlett will make a fuss again when she knows." As soon as the words fell, Willow was stunned in place. By the time she reacted and chased after him, Grant had already gone downstairs, so hurried that he didn't even take his coat. Regardless of whether the medical record was true or false. Regardless of whether Scarlett was going to marry Owen. At this moment, his only thought was to see Scarlett and take her home. 10. Owen attached great importance to his wedding with me, personally keeping an eye on every detail. Running around the company and the wedding venue during the day. Sitting in the living room at night, writing invitation cards stroke by stroke. "Owen, you can leave these things to the assistant to arrange. You are already very tired from work. There is no need to put in so much effort." I stood at the top of the stairs with a cup in my hand, speaking to Owen in the living room. He put down his pen and smiled at me. "No matter what, I want to give Miss Scarlett the best. I know that Miss Scarlett may not necessarily have me in her heart, but I put Miss Scarlett at the very tip of my heart." At the moment when our eyes met, I was dazed for a moment, and my heart moved for a long time. Miss Scarlett doesn't need to feel any burden. Just be a beautiful bride. Owen was still smiling, no longer hiding the emotions in his eyes. In the end, I smiled and nodded. But I didn't expect that Grant would find Port City. Owen and I had just finished trying on our wedding dresses and tuxedos when we saw Grant standing under the camphor tree across the street. Dressed in a simple white shirt, his hair disheveled, his face slightly pale, there was no light in his eyes. His gaze lingered on the hands of Owen and me clasped together for a moment before shifting away. Grant forced a smile, looking at me. "Scarlett, I've come to take you home." Let's not wait until the beginning of next year. Let's go back now and remarry, okay? As he spoke, he took a few steps closer in our direction. Owen subconsciously tried to stand in front of me, but I stopped him. While straightening his slightly crooked tie, I said softly, "You go wait for me in the car first. I'll be back soon. Mom made your favorite dish tonight. Let's go home together later." Owen looked down at me, the corners of his lips slightly raised, and responded, "Okay." Finally, he glanced faintly at Grant before walking towards the garage. Now only Grant and I were left by the roadside. He subconsciously wanted to get closer to me, but I took a few steps back without a trace, and said softly, "Mr. Carter, let's keep some distance between us, otherwise the paparazzi will take pictures of us later. The social media will spread some rumors that I'm deliberately entangled with my ex-husband. No matter what, everyone is always especially harsh on women. The incident with Willow was a good example. Clearly, it was Grant who was unclear about what he was doing from beginning to end, but in the end, I was the one who was not generous enough. Scarlett, Grant's eyes dimmed, and the bitter smile didn't reach his eyes. I've asked my assistant to handle the affairs on the platform. I'm sorry for making you feel wronged. I didn't know you were suffering from so many problems, I didn't know. Grant, you knew, I said looking at him, in a faint tone. If he didn't know that public opinion would cause people to suffer and become depressed, he wouldn't rather divorce me than help Willow. In my previous life, I was framed for cheating with several male models. After being judged to divorce Grant, my reputation was ruined, my career plummeted, everyone was laughing at me, and they even ran to me and asked, "Scarlett, you've been reduced to this by your ex-husband, how can you still have the face to live?" If it were me, I would have jumped from the 18th floor. The former Mrs. Carter? Grant didn't take her to heart at all, otherwise, how could he push people to death? Later, I suffered from insomnia every night, sitting by the French window and looking at the lights of thousands of homes. I burned my studio. I also burned all the things Grant gave me, as if this would dig Grant out of my heart. I vented all my grievances. I hated why the young man who used to be full of me would send me to a dead end. In the end, I committed suicide by cutting my wrists. To this day, I still remember the feeling of blood flowing from my body little by little. 11. Grant opened his mouth to explain, but the words came to his lips, but he couldn't say anything. In the end, he could only lower his head weakly. "Scarlett, I will compensate you." I couldn't help but laugh. I've heard this sentence too many times. After Willow's father passed away, Grant left on the night of the engagement banquet. He said, "Scarlett, something happened to Willow, I have to go and see." On the day of the wedding, Willow attempted suicide again. After he sent me back to the bridal chamber, he didn't return all night. At that time, I wavered on whether to continue this relationship. But when I saw Grant's tired look, I still endured it. I loved Grant, so I was willing to accompany him through all the hardships. Every time he broke his promise, it would eventually turn into a sentence, "Scarlett, I will make it up to you in the future." Grant always thought that our life was very long, but he forgot that love would be consumed. In the previous life, until the end. I could no longer tell whether I loved Grant or was obsessed. After a long while, I said sarcastically, "Grant, in fact, what I want is already very little, but you still can't take care of me. I am also the darling of my parents, why should I let you trample on me like this? So let's forget it." As soon as the words fell, I withdrew my gaze, turned sideways and was about to leave when Grant grabbed my arm in a panic. His slender body almost staggered and fell, his pale thin lips opening and closing. "I don't agree. It can't just be forgotten like this. Scarlett, you are my wife, you can't not want me." The ending sound trembled. I laughed and withdrew my hand. "We are divorced, Grant. You forced me to sign the divorce agreement, threatened me to attend the press conference for clarification, and stared at me to get the divorce certificate at the Civil Affairs Bureau. You did all of this, you can't deny it, right?" Grant was dumbfounded. I wanted to leave. When he wanted to chase after me again, I slightly raised my chin in the direction behind him. "Mr. Carter, in fact, you and Miss Jensen are quite a match." Grant's face instantly lost color. 12. He arrived in Port City in the early hours of the morning. After his assistant found out Scarlett's itinerary, he came to find her without resting for a moment. But when he saw her wearing a wedding dress, laughing and playing with Owen, he gradually stopped and stood under the camphor tree, watching blankly. He didn't know when he seemed to have rarely seen Scarlett smile so happily again. As long as they met, they would quarrel because of Willow. Slowly, he no longer went home often, either staying in the company or getting drunk and staying out all night with Ethan and others. So at that moment, he realized with incomparable clarity. What Scarlett said that day at the Civil Affairs Bureau was from the bottom of her heart. She didn't want him anymore. But he couldn't live without her. However long the two people in the wedding dress shop were busy, he stood outside for however long. He even thought about rushing in to beat Owen and warn him, "Don't covet my wife." But in the end, he couldn't take that step. He was afraid that Willow would hate him. "Grant, my sister has been gone for a long time." Willow tugged at Grant's clothes, pulling back the Grant who was lost in thought. He lowered his eyes to look at her, his voice a little hoarse. "Why are you here?" I heard that my sister is going to marry someone else. I'm afraid you're sad, so I came to see you," she said softly, and then was about to hug Grant when Grant frowned and reached out to hold Willow's shoulders. In an instant, her eyes were wet. "Grant. If my sister doesn't want you, I want you. Let's get married too, okay?" Grant had never refused any of her requests. She originally thought that after Scarlett divorced him, she would be able to successfully take over the position of Mrs. Carter. But at this moment, Grant instantly cooled down his face. "Willow, do you know what you're talking about?" "I know. Grant, I like you." She confessed her feelings for the first time. But Grant smiled miserably, and cried as he smiled. Ethan had warned him countless times. "Willow's eyes are restless when she looks at you. If you don't want your marriage to be destroyed, I advise you to send her away. Grant, you're just blinded by your own infatuation and can't see Willow's thoughts for you. Send Willow away, don't let her ruin your marriage." But he had never believed it once. He deserved it. 13. Port City is far from Kingsport, but if something goes on social media, it will ferment quickly. On the third day that Grant pestered me, Owen sent the evidence that Willow had faked the medical record to Grant's email, and listed the evidence that Grant had broken his promises to me countless times for Willow, forming a closed loop and publishing it online. Overnight, public opinion was polarized, but it had nothing to do with me. Some said that Willow was taking advantage of kindness to repay her, destroying my marriage with Grant, which led to the breakdown of our relationship. Others said that Grant was insincere. If he really wanted to repay Mr. Jensen's kindness back then, wouldn't it be okay to repay him with money and resources? He had to bully his own wife and force her to be disheartened and divorced. Grant's reputation was damaged. The group's stock was turbulent. Before long, I also threw out the evidence that I had accidentally found that Willow had directed and acted, hired people to take pictures of her and Grant entering and leaving the hotel at the same time, and bought water troops to scold herself as a mistress. The social media was in full swing. Grant was also busy and overwhelmed. He originally wanted to send Willow abroad, but after seeing this topic, he almost strangled Willow to death on the roadside. He questioned Willow. "Why do you want to do this?" Willow initially wanted to play the emotional card. Until she was strangled and could barely breathe, she suddenly laughed wildly and generously admitted it. "I just want to be Mrs. Carter, I just want to force Scarlett to divorce you. Grant, as long as you really love Scarlett, I can't find any loopholes." Grant was so angry that he vomited a pool of blood and fainted on the spot. The video was taken by passers-by and wildly circulated on the internet. Carter's stock price plummeted all the way, and Grant woke up and began to lose his mind, and was directly kicked down from the position of president. And Willow. Now her reputation is ruined, and she has to go abroad. It's just unfortunate. She had a car accident on the way to the plane and died on the spot. 14. On the day of the wedding, Owen gave me a grand wedding, full of flowers and fireworks all night, known to everyone. When a guest joked that it was a blessing from the previous life for me to marry Owen, Owen sneered and directly invited the person out of the wedding. He also said frankly after the vows, "I am the Chu family's son-in-law. In this life, I am a member of the Chu family, and after death, I am a ghost of the Chu family." Owen knew that I might not be completely him in my heart, but his kindness to me had not changed. On the wedding night, he hugged me very tightly, as if he was afraid that I would leave, would disappear. It wasn't until I forced him to ask that I found out. Grant committed suicide. Before his death, he was awake for a period of time. He sent the medical report I left in the studio to Owen. He also wrote me a letter. The letter was very long. Every word was his shame on me. He also talked about having a nightmare. In the dream, he forced me to divorce, I refused to compromise, and he designed to frame me and send me to the beds of several men. In the end, I despaired and committed suicide by cutting my wrists. He said that he didn't mean to in the dream, he just wanted me to compromise and bend over, and he never thought that it would harm me to despair and die. He didn't even know that the thing about my illness was true. He said that if he knew, he would definitely not treat me like this. When he saw the bathroom full of blood, his heart was broken, and he wished he was the one who died. The end of the letter was a sentence, "Fortunately, the things in the dream did not happen." And another sentence, "I'm sorry." I sneered. In the end, I threw the letter into the trash can at random, along with the medical report. "Miss Scarlett." Owen frowned slightly. I said softly, "The former Scarlett was sick, but I am not the former Scarlett anymore." Leaving him, the illness is also cured. After a long while, Owen smiled helplessly and dotingly. I looked at him and smiled along with him. Fortunately, in this life, I didn't lose anything.